Hello and welcome to yet another BetaKit Live, back again in person in the Startwell Studios. I am Douglas Soltys, Editor-in-Chief of BetaKit, and today, for Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we have a very, very important conversation. I'm going to hit you with some stats off the top to set the stage, and then introduce our wonderful panel guests of incredibly smart people to explain to me what these numbers mean. Okay. It is essentially a sad reality that cyber attacks are a matter of when, not if. Recent data suggests that cyber attacks in Canada have increased 600% since the pandemic. That's a lot. I'm a liberal arts major, but that's a really big number. And particularly small to medium-sized businesses are incredibly vulnerable. Mastercard recently released some new data showing just how pernicious of a problem this is. 16% of small businesses surveyed are certain that they are not certain of the next steps to take following an attack, and 18% of SMBs are not confident that their business could fully recover within 6 months. On the other hand, consumers are very confident about what a cyber attack means to where they spend their dollars, with about half of consumers, only half, saying that they would continue patronizing a business that had recently suffered a cyber attack. And as a small business owner myself, if we lost half of our customer base, that'd be a pretty big problem. And 55% of customers have basically said that past breaches have deterred them from continuing to patronize that business and make online purchases. So what are small business owners to do? I have absolutely no idea. Fortunately, we have brought together a great panel of guests to explain this to me. We have Aviva Klein, Vice President of Digital Payments and Cybersecurity Solutions at Mastercard, Darryl Julott, Managing Lead at Digital Main Street, and Charles Finlay, Founding Executive Director of the Rogers Cybersecure Catalyst. Okay, guys, it is clear that there is a significant gap between the current state of threats, and I don't know if anyone's seen in the news, whether it's like major Canadian retailers or casinos in Vegas, like this is impacting everybody, and the level of SMB preparedness. I think I want to start by exploring the disconnect between how important this is, how important entrepreneurs recognize it to be, how certain customers are that it's going to influence where their dollars are being spent, and why small businesses do not seem to be making it a priority. As a small business entrepreneur myself, I know the realities of understanding the important thing that I should get to tomorrow, but I can't get to today because I have other considerations. When it comes to cybersecurity and cyber attacks, can't wait. So where do we begin? I think I want to talk again about this gap, this idea of this. I think when we had our prep call last week to talk about this, it was defined as an imperfect storm between the current state of threats, small business preparedness. What is the cause of this disconnect? And I think, Aviva, I'm going to start with you because Mastercard has been doing some really great leadership in first collating this data, talking to Canadian small businesses, and just seeing what's going on out there. So I'm going to maybe help our audience understand what's causing this disconnect, because I would think, most founders, in the startup to scale up space, entrepreneurs would attack problems like this full on. And in the small business entrepreneurship space, it seems like there's more going on here.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Douglas, for having me on the podcast today. We recognize that small business owners are very busy people. Yeah. They've got a lot on their plate. They're, the chief marketing officer, the sales officer, the janitor, and the chief information security officer.
Probably doing shipping, packaging.
The whole shebang, for sure. And so we know that, they're stretched. We also know that cybersecurity is really scary and daunting. And a lot of small business owners are not technologists. They're following their passion, they're following their heart, and they're doing what they love and doing what they're good at, and they're making a living that way. And so when they hear about the cybersecurity threat, I think they get a little panicked because they don't actually know what to do. And so we're really here to sort of shine the light on, small, meaningful actions that small businesses can do to demystify cybersecurity for themselves and protect their businesses. And there's tons of resources available online. We've done a partnership with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business where we have all sorts of learning materials and tutorials available. We're going to be launching something with Digital Main Street.
Oh, that's a
in the
tease.
coming
We'll get to that in a bit, maybe.
Okay. Yeah. But, there's tons of information out there. And I think that's the big gap, busyness and just a lack of understanding of what cybersecurity is and how they can protect themselves.
Okay, Darryl, I'm going to want to go to you and see if that resonates. I think everyone knows what Mastercard is and what Mastercard does, but like maybe explain what Digital Main Street is and how you're connected with these types of entrepreneurs. Like the one thing that stood up to me here was the idea that there's a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners outside maybe the spectrum of BetaKit's coverage that are tech enabled in some way, but not necessarily tech forward. That it doesn't make them any less of an entrepreneur. But can you talk a little bit about what DMS does and add on to that mindset of maybe where their focus is, maybe where their skill set is, maybe where their gaps, their blind spots are when it comes to this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Pardon me. So Digital Main Street, we exist to help, all SMBs, really across the country and beyond with digital, to make it incredibly simple. And that's everything from, and Aviva, I love to use the word scary because I often say, it's everything from the sexy stuff, websites and e-commerce, that customer facing kind of stuff, to the scary stuff like cybersecurity and that. And I think, it's easy to fall in love with the sexy stuff, and make sure you have a website and all that, but it's just as easy to kind of shy away from the scary stuff. And Douglas, you even said when you started, you understand kind of putting off, what maybe you should do today, but don't necessarily need to. And I think, for a lot of our businesses, it's that, fortunately, I guess they haven't been breached yet. Yeah. And so that kind of, reactionary mindset of, okay, this has happened, now I got to deal with it, has not kicked in yet.
Yeah. I just follow up on that. Like it's a real gap between mentally, I completely acknowledge that this is important. I think in Canada, we've all seen large scale enterprises, even to like in the US, you're seeing like Las Vegas casinos be the subject of like severe and significant cyber attacks. And then as a small business owner, a founder, someone with a limited set of a team and resources, I'm like, well, that's great. I don't feel like I have the capacity to engage in that. I am up to my neck already with other issues, like whatever else is on fire. I'm the janitor, customer support, all this stuff. Do you think it's like a bet that we're just like, I'm too small, maybe they won't target me? If they're going after MGM, maybe they won't go after insert small business across Canada? Or is it just like just waiting until it becomes a burning fire to the extent that other issues at the business are that they're going to deal with it?
I think it's a bit of both. I think human nature just fundamentally, we're set up to kind of ignore the things that scare us, right? So I kind of go back to that word. So it's easy for us to just ignore it because it hasn't happened yet. But I also think with small businesses, it's a combination of misinformation. So sometimes they've been misled. And maybe, they're told they're secure and they don't need to worry, or, maybe they were sold something that, was going to be the silver bullet, we'll call it, combined with just a general lack of understanding. Because to your point, they need to be tech enabled in many ways, but being tech enabled does not necessarily mean that you're tech savvy. Tech savvy,
tech forward, maybe even tech interested. Yeah. I think we could, across the spectrum of our organizations here, we can go from the highest scaling venture-backed startups to actual Main Street businesses, every e-commerce or digitally enabled business in between, right? That doesn't necessarily mean like the realities of 2023 means that you have to be dealing with like tech access in some way. That doesn't mean that you care to want to have the sophistication for it. Maybe Charles, that's probably a great place to get you in, and I maybe ask you to start again talking about what your organization does, because I think when we were talking about this is like there's a layer of the immediate engagement for small business owners and what they deal with day to day, and then you're at a layer above like the maybe the meta context of tracking like the CSI really spooky stuff, right? like it's something you go up to Mission Impossible when it comes to cyber threats.
We're definitely working on Mission Impossible at all times. And listen, appreciate being part of this terrific conversation, Douglas. Thank you for this. Roger Cybersecure Catalyst is a part of Toronto Metropolitan University, and we deliver workforce training, a whole variety of public education, and we work with small businesses around major cybersecurity challenges. And I really echo what Aviva and Darryl have said. This problem can seem to small business owners like something that is just too complex, too difficult to really manage effectively. Small business owners are looking at incredibly long to-do lists.
Yeah.
And where does this land on the to-do list? It's also viewed as a cost, right? And that's a major issue. And I think, and I know we'll talk about it, probably a little bit later, but one of the things to talk about is cybersecurity as a competitive advantage, about how businesses can position themselves as being cybersecure and how that can really be in a differentiator in oftentimes crowded markets. So small businesses and small business owners are critical targets of cybersecurity attacks, and it's great that we're having this conversation to talk more about how we can help.
Okay, we'll get to the competitive advantage stuff in a bit. I think I really want to hammer on this, and again, I might be over-indexing based upon personal experience, but I feel like, again, as a founder, most of my decisions are not fully mentally driven or scenario driven. There's like an emotional component and weight to this, and I want to attack that. And maybe, Charles, even like before we get into some of the stats, I want to ask you a question. Oh, this is a really good prompt for anyone watching across Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. If you have a question, the BetaKit team is monitoring the feeds right now, submitting queues, and they'll send them to me through the magic of the internet, and we'll make sure that these very smart people answer those questions. So do not hesitate to post something in any of the various chats on wherever in the internet that you're seeing this right now. If you're seeing this on video demand, and you're like, oh, I wish somehow I could go back in time. Do not worry, because we're going to do a full wrap up on BetaKit. And when we do that, we can pass those questions along and include that in the recap. But to that complexity, I know I don't want to over-index too much on, these poor founders, they're so busy and things really seem scary. Do you think the way that this is covered, and maybe even some of the work that you do that is addressing, identifying the most bleeding edge threats, the large scale security issues, and the media's coverage of that creates a bit of a meta layer that all cybersecurity incidents are like that everything is that level of complex? I guess, how much responsibility do we put on the small business owners to parse the difference between what happens at let's say a national Canadian book retailer versus what happens in their local business environment? Like, is it easy right now for people to parse the difference between those types of cyber attacks?
For sure. So I would say that there is in the media probably, the narrative leans towards discussions of the more complex attacks related to things like critical infrastructure, because that's, things that are moving public policy, and that's what's engaging, governments and international, collaborations between law enforcement agencies and all the rest. So I think there probably is that perspective. But, what we're here to talk about is actually, I think, in some ways the greater threat, which is the day-to-day attacks on small businesses that jeopardize those businesses and really jeopardize the Canadian economy. I mean, small businesses are the heart of the Canadian economy. As we all know, the Canadian economy is made up, vast majority of our GDP is generated by small businesses. And so the attacks on those businesses are critical, not just for the businesses themselves and the founders, but for the effective functioning of our economy and society as a whole.
Okay. This is important, right? Especially in a post-COVID environment. I want to maybe dig in on what you guys are seeing and how you might respond to that. The level of complexity, parsing that, what some of the issues maybe are. I think before I get into that, I'm going to lay out for the audience here just a couple of key stats that came from the Mastercard report, because I got them in front of me. It's easy for me to do. So in terms of like small to medium-sized business confidence and preparedness, the numbers were not great. So we got 57% of SMB owners have not had any form of cyber training, which understandable. What constitutes cyber training? Again, have watched all the Mission Impossible movies. Does that qualify? Probably not. 33% of SMBs are confident in their tools, which I think is something that I really want to dig in on, because that's just not enough. And I think we can maybe talk about the options that they have. And then 53% of SMB owners feel that they cannot spend or spare the cost of adopting new tools. So we are in this situation whereby small business owners, entrepreneurs are telling Mastercard, one, that they are really concerned that they're a target or that they're not very confident that they can handle this. Their customers are telling them and you that they take this stuff very, very seriously and may not continue doing business if the business suffers a breach. But then we have small business owners saying they're not willing to commit spend and they haven't been trained. And I'm wondering, based upon your professional opinion, like where you think that is coming from. Is it, as we were discussing before, this stuff just reads too complex in terms of the threats, and they're like, if I'm going to get Mission Impossible, I'm going to get Mission Impossible. I don't have time for this. Is it something to do with the tooling? I was incredibly surprised in the data, digging in to see that they just weren't willing to spend more. And I'm just wondering your thoughts on that when it comes to the solutions for this. Are they too expensive? Should they be are they too complex in implementing? Like, help me understand what that barrier is between what these businesses know they should be doing and then what they're not working towards.
I think it's a mixed bag, to be honest. I think there's a lot of factors at play here. I think that despite people being concerned about things, I think deep down they don't actually believe that they are targets and they're too small to, be on the radar of a cyber criminal. Okay. And so to that, I'd say you're not too small. Cyber criminals are very well organized and very motivated bunch of people. And you're not too small because you're likely connected to a larger business where they're going to go hit you in order to hit them up next.
It's like if we can get grandma, we can get the whole family.
You got it.
Pretending to be grandma. Yeah. Okay.
You got it. I think the other thing is that, the direct impact of a cybersecurity event is not necessarily well understood by small businesses either. Mm-hmm. They don't understand that it's going to cost them time and money to rebuild or reconnect or reestablish or get their data back if they suffer from like a ransomware attack. So, just a couple of other stats that you didn't rhyme off.
Let's do it. Your survey was very detailed in the data.
Thank you. The average cost of a cyber attack in Canada is $5.6 million. Now, we recognize that that's a blended number of big businesses and small businesses, but I have seen other research on the Canadian marketplace, and they're putting that anywhere between $10,000 and $25,000 to recover a small business to recover from a cyber attack. And so, if you don't think a couple $100 a month is affordable, I mean, you're never going to recover your business on $15,000 or $25,000 loss. So, I think that that's a big part of it. And just to hit on what Charles was saying is that they don't actually recognize the benefits of investing. They're looking at it really just from a cost perspective, but there's actually upside to be had. We know that consumers are much more interested in dealing with businesses that have strong security. They're voting with their dollars, and they're willing to pay more to deal with a small business that actually keeps their data safe and secure. Yep. So I think there's a bunch of things that are inhibiting small businesses from making the investment. And I think the biggest one is the fear of the unknown. They don't actually know what cybersecurity actually is. And, we've done a really great job of making it sound really complicated and scary. When in actuality, there are, low cost, no cost solutions that small businesses are and can continue to invest in. Things like strong passwords, things like antivirus protection, enabling multi-factor authentication, patching. Those types of things are no cost or low cost items that they can invest in to keep their business safe and secure.
Okay. I want to dig into that a little bit more in terms of and get Charles in again, because I'm sure you have some thoughts on actually the greatest risk is the people at your company because the human factor. But Darryl, I just want to check in and see if that resonates with you in terms of what we're identifying, maybe that, because that once we get into the range of the $1 million, we're definitely talking about any small business, less than 10 owner. But we're also talking now about startups, high scaling venture backed, where it's hey, we just raised a $2.5 to $3 million seed round. we're so focused on building and spending money. But that's your whole investment. That's like your 18 to 24 months of burn. So like that number is big enough that it should scare a lot of different types of businesses, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, pardon me, to build on what Aviva said, we try our best to demystify things, with incredibly simple examples. One that I know Charles is going to touch on in a second is, showing them the risk of if an employee plugs in a USB that they brought in from home and that USB is, corrupted, for example, right? I know incredibly simple, but could be incredibly deadly to their business. I also love using the insurance example. So I'll talk to a business owner and I'll say, okay, well, why do you have car insurance? In case something happens to my car, why do you have home insurance? Well, why do you think there's cybersecurity insurance? And then
I will tell you, you'll get better premiums if you can demonstrate to your insurer that you actually have protection in place for all those small businesses thinking that insurance is the silver bullet to this. Super important, but you'll get lower premiums if you can demonstrate to the insurer that you do have some, systems in place. And
you want no points on your driver's license, exactly, right? Like this is because I'm assuming that we're talking to entrepreneurs and businesses that are looking to build generational businesses or are inheriting generational businesses. And there's maybe Darryl, could you speak a little bit to the pride or the mindset or the emotional connection that these small businesses have to their business that might be a little bit different than some of the startups that we cover on BetaKit? That idea of like, because those businesses are coming in and they're basically like, we have 2 years to prove that we can take over the world and we're going to raise a lot of money to figure out, but it's very much designed as an experiment. We're talking predominantly here about businesses that it might be generational, might be inherited, might be considered lifestyle businesses, which are no less important, but these people are in the long haul, right?
Yeah. And I think the first thing, just to build on your last question, is people that are going to try and attack you from a cyber perspective, they don't really care where you're located, what type of business you are, how many employees you have. They're coming after you. So, whether you're a real estate agent or, a retail store or whatever it is, like they're coming. So to your question around like size of business and scale and industry and stuff like that, they're indifferent, right? In a really bad way. But talking about this kind of emotional connection, when you look at our main streets, they're really the heart and soul of our community, right? We all live in different communities across the city. We all have our favorite businesses, whether they're clothing stores, local coffee shops. You probably know the barista's name, the owner of the clothing store, whatever it might be. So it's no longer just a number.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to give one additional number just to reinforce that, because again, there's just a lot in this report and I want to highlight as much of it as possible. We'll link to it, of course. You'll be able to check it out on your own. But this idea that maybe connecting the thread of the emotional relationship here, because again, this resonated with me. 79% of the small business owners surveyed agree that businesses have a moral obligation to protect consumers' data. We cover a lot of different types of businesses on BetaKit. It's not often that we have them speaking in terms of moral obligation when it comes to consumers. Like definitely like, making their lives better and enriching and all that stuff. But I think that speaks to the types of business owners across Canada that we're speaking to, that like this is close to the vest for them in terms of the reality. Okay. That being said, I would like to get you back in, Charles, and talk to us about, follow up on what Aviva was saying in terms of what the actual most common threats are. Like let's get this out of the Mission Impossible range, because again, a USB stick at your local cafe or something left at a co-working space plugged into the wrong laptop at the wrong time can be a problem. We have been targeted for attacks. They all targeted recent employees pretending to be me, sending them messages, asking to be like, hey, I want to surprise the team with a couple cards. Can you go make some like real human works
social engineering?
Yes, completely social engineered towards. I wouldn't say the most vulnerable, but maybe in a sense, new employees being entirely vulnerable, getting a message from the boss that they need to spend money. Talk to it, like demystify some of the threats that you're tracking and paying attention to for this band of business.
Sure. Well, what you've just talked about, Douglas, is one of the most common kinds of threats, which is business email compromise, which is exactly what you've just described, which is a socially engineered email that is sent to a potentially vulnerable employee, a new employee, potentially, that claims to come from the boss, and that asks that employee to do something. Mm-hmm. Pay an invoice. provide confidential information, take an action in respect of clicking on a link, et cetera, et cetera. These emails are extremely common and they're extremely effective. And do not underestimate how sophisticated they are.
Yeah.
They will sound like you. They will look like they come from you, if you're the boss. They will have your signature line, and your employees will, often not take a second look at them if they ask them to do something. And that's why there's such
if it feels right, why would they question?
Yeah,
it?
why would they question it? And this
I'm
is
a caring boss. Why would I not want to give gift cards to my team? Yeah,
absolutely. And and the pandemic made this a lot worse because people were away from each other. Right? They weren't across rooms from each other where, somebody could look over and say, "Hey boss, really? You're going to do this?" They were separated from each other. Regular business process was disrupted. So these kinds of emails became more and more effective and more important. And this is a critical part of the sort of the threat matrix, if you think of that, in terms of what small businesses are facing. And one of the key ways to address this challenge is training for employees. So to add to the terrific list that Aviva just mentioned in terms of two-factor authentication, regular password updates, patching, training for employees around these kinds of emails and what they need to do about them is really, really important. So again, it's not a complicated, attack. It's in some ways a very basic attack executed extremely well, and it works a stunning percentage of the time. And that's why
they do it.
Cybersecurity attackers do it. And that's why they continue to do it.
Yeah. And I'm very happy to share, my personal experience with the team because one, we thwarted that stuff. We do use 2FA, like again, being a little bit more tech forward is more comfortable, but I'm also happy to share here. And again, it's for everyone watching this to know where this can come from. I made the grammar reference before. That's not just like an analogy, a metaphor. We had mail stolen from our place of business. My grandmother was contacted, pretending to be a Big Five bank, asking questions in the hopes that they could get the right security answers to access our business. They weren't. My grandmother wasn't even the target. She was to be the Trojan horse entry method. And I really share this stuff just to make it easy for everyone to understand, to maybe not be ashamed. Like obviously our employee, when they were subject to the email pretending to be me, they felt really dumb about it. But I was like, hey, we stopped this. We won this scenario. And now in being in that circumstance, we've learned to be a little bit more wary about it. So I'm very happy to open up all the near misses in the hopes that other businesses can not have to near miss themselves to feel good about it. Is there anything else in terms of that the low hanging fruits or demystifying any of the software and stuff? Like we've talked about the social engineering component. Is there anything you can maybe say to reinforce the importance of having that, MVP band of taking this stuff seriously?
I mean, the threat is real. That's for sure. I think that, to the extent that people can afford it, antivirus software is certainly super important. I think it's just, again, like being open and communicate with teams, with staff, with employees, share experiences, share missed attempts, and just raise the education and awareness level that this could happen to anybody. Yeah,
a real see something, say something. Charles made the great point of like this has happened a lot. Like post-COVID, a lot of coworkers are removed from each other. That creates honestly like a window of opportunity. You were talking about making things seem and sound like people, and my brain immediately went to generative AI and the number of live streams that I've done and podcasts I've recorded where it would not be much work for someone to even make it sound like me. They could actually make it sound like me. I have put out enough data into the world. Darryl, you onboard a lot of different businesses across Canada. at Digital Main Street for a variety of reasons. Is there anything else that we missed here when it comes to how they're thinking about things, how they're not thinking about things, where their priorities are that we haven't addressed here? Or do you feel like we're good to move on?
No, I think we're good to move on. The big thing is just there's a lack of understanding, but there's also been a perceived lack of focus on the topic. So a lot of the work that, Aviva, the Mastercard team and Digital Main Street are doing, Charles and his team are doing is really just to bring that spotlight and make this a forward topic, right? So businesses know, like you said, right from the top, it's not a matter of if, it's when, and how well are you protected, right?
Okay. Well,
and then what's next?
Yes.
Right.
What's next? Well, what is next now is that we are going to turn this from we've done the fear mongering off the top, and now we're going to get this positive. We're going to close this gap. We are going to, well, I say we as if like I'm including myself in the collection of experts on this topic. I'm going to listen to you all discuss ways that we can convince small businesses, entrepreneurs, startups to make this a priority by, I think, reframing how it's seen and, again, the value proposition. I guess, Aviva, when we were doing the prep call, you said something that was interesting about reframing this as not just a business risk, but a reputational risk. Can you talk a little bit about like how we get this from, hey, this isn't just you were talking about the financial impact, but there's like you were talking as well about the insurance. There are follow-on effects from just the oopsie, someone got access to my password, right? Is that a place that we can maybe get it a little bit more tangible, a little bit more manageable and addressable for entrepreneurs to say, I would never want that to happen. I really don't want this part to happen.
I think the way that I was talking about it in the prep call was about how like this is not the IT director's problem only, right? It's everybody's problem. It's not it is a security issue, but it's not just IT that needs to be thinking about it. And it does really need to be reframed and recast as a business risk. And as Charles astutely commented earlier, it can be a differentiator. And so I think that, small businesses need to instill across their employee base that this is everyone's problem. We all take part in this. I always always say fighting fraud is a team sport. You can't do it alone. And so, how do we take it off of just the IT director's desk and put it chiefly in front of the chief revenue officer, the chief, the CEO of the organization, the marketing? How do we reframe this and showcase that it's not just about data, that stolen data has consequences to the business that was breached. Mm-hmm. It has consequences to the employee or the customer whose information has now been stolen. Yeah. They can use that data to open up new accounts, to take money out of accounts, drain accounts, things of that nature. And that's really why Mastercard is so passionate about cybersecurity, because we don't want stolen credentials to be floating around and perpetuating frauds on any of the networks or at any of the banks that we do business with.
Oh, that's a really great point. I didn't think of it that way, because you sit on either side of this potential horror show from the business standpoint and the consumer standpoint. And if you can put yourself in the middle of that stuff happening, you're saving kind of like two sides of this, right?
That's right. I mean, at the end of the day, we're in the trust business, and we need customers and merchants, cardholders and merchants, to trust the network. And if there are too many stolen credentials flying around there, that just leads to payment fraud. A little bit of a trust stack we need. Okay, that's right.
But you also said I want to go back to, you had said like this can't just be on the CTO or like name a division. When I talk to founders, and not about this stuff, about things like a liberal arts major here, right, guys? Like when I am mentoring founders about the things that I'm knowledgeable about, I talk to them often about not abdicating the responsibility of things that you don't know too much about. Just like you can't just outsource this to your legal team, your agency, your name, and just turn your back and trust that it's going to work. How do we get that then to be actionable for the whole team, company, division? Because you had also said when we were talking about like, this is scary and monolithic. We need to keep that there, but this has to be actionable activity. How then would you be looking to communicate this internally in terms of that shared responsibility or ownership of that responsibility?
Yeah. I mean, I think first and foremost, I think small businesses need to take a minute and think about the what ifs and what happens next. And a lot of small businesses aren't doing that. So I think, when these business owners sit down and think about how do I prepare for this, it's not just on their shoulders. It needs to be in shared objectives. It needs to be in roles and responsibilities across like their entire team. It shouldn't just be, as I said before, with the IT or the security department. And I think just, breaking it down into small, manageable chunks, even like things like just like policy, right? Like the employee manual needs to be updated. And, maybe not everybody has an employee manual, but maybe it's like top 10 tips when you join Small Business Incorporated. These are the things that we need to do. Like
here's how we should do it. Here's why we do it.
That's
how,
right.
That's
right. And so, yeah, it's really annoying to have, a 16-digit password. But explaining why we do that and really having high standards across the entire organization, I think, shines the light on this for somebody who probably doesn't think about security in their day-to-day job.
Yes. And to your point in simplifying the tooling and the solutions, if you are really annoyed by having a super long password and can only remember like the 4-digit password, which is just like not enough, there are a bunch of free or cheaply available tools that will manage that for you. So you can have the most
complicated.
Yes, the most complex thing that you just I love using Touch ID on my Apple devices, but even just like one button press to manage that stuff for you. But I think what you're saying here, like Darryl, you said something funny that I wrote down because I just wanted to highlight it. We've kind of already covered this, but you were like, to what Aviva was saying, we need to fearmonger in the right way. We need positive fearmongering. But you had also connected this, and I think, Digital Main Street is in the business of digital transformation. It's kind of right there in the mandate. And you had said something interesting to me, that you feel like this conversation around cybersecurity and just general like preventative health practices for your business gets too often caught up in a broader digital transformation story and maybe gets muddled, lost in the mix, or not properly prioritized. That's pretty interesting to me as someone who is watching someone responsible for like helping digital transformation all the way down to Main Street. Can you unpack that a little bit in terms of, is it maybe just, this isn't a digital transformation live stream, but like if we were to do that, is that as vague and ill-defined as maybe some of the scary stuff, like the Mission Impossible cybersecurity stuff?
Yeah, and I'm going to share kind of an example here, and I only say because I know she's not listening, but I always use my mother as a litmus test.
Okay. Do we know, actually, if your mother's not listening?
So I always think to myself, if we're looking at a new tech or a new thing, how would she respond to this, right?
Okay.
And, if I was to ask her if she was right here and you said, Michelle, what do you think about digital transformation? I can almost guarantee you she is not going to mention cybersecurity. And so it gets caught in the weeds, again, kind of going back to that sexy versus scary. And so I think it's, from my perspective now, I think it's less about the fact that it's getting caught up. It's more so how do we work collectively together, as small and large groups to kind of shine that spotlight specifically on cyber and almost like forcefully pull it out. So it's seen as kind of a separate, very important item that these businesses need to dedicate time for. And it's not just a part of, another piece of their strategy.
Okay. First, if your mom is watching, please leave a comment in any of the social feeds that you're seeing this, because I want to prove your son wrong. But 2, I think it's really important. Do you think that's because there's too much to digital transformation, or just inherently within that, it's a process of look at what we're adding, look at what we're enabling, and that is usually a very exciting, positive, like, hey, we've added an e-commerce store. We can sell anywhere. And it's like, yes, you have now opened up your business to threat vectors from all across the internet. Like, is it, you're just not seeing the two-way street of transformation?
I think they just genuinely have a hard time connecting that, right? Again, I think for a business owner, when you talk about digital, it's very easy to come in and go, okay, yeah, you know what? I need to do a podcast, or I need my social media channels, or I need to be on TikTok, or I need to be on this. That just is, it's very easy. It's mainstream. We see it everywhere. We're kind of hit in the face with it, right? But when they're looking at protecting their business, again, it's a scary topic, and I'm using the same word a lot, right? But it's easy for them to kind of just brush that under the proverbial rug. and I haven't been hacked yet, I haven't been hit yet, I'm not that target. So I think
We forgot that we launched that social channel that we don't use anymore, but it's still linked to this account that could ruin our lives. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's I think that's where a lot of them struggle, where it's almost like an out of sight, out of mind thing too, where it's kind of there, it hasn't happened. So that's why a lot of the work that we're doing is focused on making sure that we're kind of bringing it forefront. We're almost hitting them in the face with it, right? And sharing these stats, and you said it, fear mongering in the right way, but making sure they really understand the impact and the liability and everything that is putting them at risk. And just to build on what Aviva was talking about reputational, and it ties to what you asked me before about small business, right? The biggest strength and in the cyber case, potentially the biggest weakness of a small business is oftentimes the business owner is the business. And what I mean by that is, Douglas, using his example, you and BetaKit have kind of become one and the same. You're very much
face of the brand. We have a responsibility
and so there's that personal connection, right? Whereas you almost feel like you're letting somebody down if you're a small business owner and this has happened. It's not just 1, 2, and 3. It's Aviva, Douglas, and Darryl and team, right?
Yeah, and your customers, and I get that's again. I am trying to find emotional blind spots to hit founders and entrepreneurs right now with this stuff, so it sticks, and then they take this seriously. I want to get into like the brand stuff and the positive considerations, but Charles, I need you to, from your meta level perspective, we need to fearmonger in more ways here. And I'm wondering if what we were talking about from the transformation standpoint, or even just like helping businesses recognize that every new piece of technology that they turn on, every new piece of software that they integrate is a tool that can have positive and negative impacts. They're a door and a window, and that can be a two-way consideration. Do you see that in the data when it comes to threat vectors or attacks or things like that? Give me some policy backing on this instinct that I have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's two issues. There's the integration of new technologies, and then there's digitizing legacy systems, which is another issue. So, for example, and this is a real challenge. We've seen the application of the Internet of Things, sensors, oftentimes weakly secure and vulnerable to attack, that have been installed on the shop floor of
we got this new coffee machine because it plays music, and it was the entrance to our whole back-end infrastructure.
Yeah, we've got a tool and die, small manufacturer that's in the supply chain of Honda, and this small business owner has been told that they need to increase productivity. And so this small business owner is under pressure to introduce technologies into their business that, they might not understand particularly well in terms of the security. Mm-hmm. And so what we have is these businesses racing to apply, sometimes productivity improving technologies that are not secure. Mm. And that's a major challenge. And to the point that Aviva was making earlier, oftentimes cyber criminals are looking for access not to the small business, but to the small business's supply chain. And that's a real problem. We're seeing that more and more, where it's not the small business that's the target. It's the OEM, it's Honda, it's the end manufacturer that's and I'm just using that as an example, as that's the target, and it's the small business that's going to get dinged for it.
I think what we're saying here is, even the way that you talked about sort of, the transformation to digital, and not necessarily looking at the scary bits, but looking at the sexy bits, is this notion of security by design.
Yeah.
And really doing things purposely and in a meaningful way to say, yes, I do want to take advantage of the digital economy, but I'm going to do it in a safe and secure way. And, it's not just small businesses. Charles talked about IoT. We see a lot of companies who are, making smart devices who never really had to think about technology. Yes. The toasters, the fridges, like these types of things are coming with really poor security.
Yeah, the most vulnerable device in all the world were the first gen IoT devices that never had any sort of built-in firmware updates. So they were just sent off into the world as a open port for whoever wants to get at it. That's and I love the connection here because we've been using the small business framing, and particularly with you here, we're thinking think of that Main Street business that needs to take this stuff seriously. I love that you brought in examples of the factory floor, the places and the people that are not customer facing, that would never think of this in terms of I am crossing this barrier to protect the business. But depending upon the electronics, the devices, the internet connectivity that they bring in could be an easier access point. I think it's super important to expand that up. But the design component, can we tie that in? Is that part of the selling point? Can you go back to customers and say, if it's one thing to say we might actually be a threat up the logistics stack to bigger fish in our economy, can these businesses then go back and say, because we built this in, hey, other businesses, we're actually ready to sell into you. We're ready to go one level up into the enterprise and say,
absolutely. I mean, if you think about, just a standard request for a proposal or request for information process, I mean, these are standard questions on, for any type of buying and selling situation. So, if you're looking to sell into government or sell into a large business, they're going to ask you these questions. And so you're best served to have really good, strong responses.
Yeah. And again, that's as someone who's filled out a variety of different forms for BetaKit, that can be a huge pain point. It's not necessarily fun, but what forces me to do it, other than my team saying you really need to sign or fill this out before end of day or we're going to lose this opportunity, is the opportunity of what doing that thing enables, right? So if this is something that you can bring ready to bear, you might actually be driving your business forward. Charles, I want to get you in because when we were talking about this, your eyes went three times wider. I know this.
This is so exciting.
Yes. I know we have enough cameras on this. But I hope we got a reaction shot from Charles being like, finally, yes, this is what I'm here for. So and maybe I guess from your perspective and what Cybersecurity Catalyst does, how do we give, because it's one thing to say, it's a time about oh yeah, if you take this stuff seriously, your business is going to grow and scale, but do you have any qualitative or quantitative stuff that we can anchor onto that to use as a proof case?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a competitive benefit or differentiate. It's a competitive requirement more and more. To Aviva's point, I mean, if you are going to go into business with a sophisticated purchaser, if you are going to be a part of a sophisticated supply chain, not just on the manufacturing side, but on the services side, if you're going to be a vendor of any kind to a major organization now, you are going to have to show that you are cyber secure. Yeah. I mean, it's just part of doing business. So, that compulsory element is really important for small businesses that want to grow to understand. And to the point that Aviva was making about security by design, this is so important. Entrepreneurs and innovators have to understand that security needs to be baked into products from the very beginning, not an add-on after the fact. Yes. Okay, we've designed a product, we built a product. Yeah. Now we're going to try to make it secure, but right from the start, it has to be a really important consideration.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the processes of protecting your business, but if you're building it into your products, you're selling that. I love the idea of this becoming table stakes, because I think most entrepreneurs will get to the minimum viable product and then go from there. So if we make this part of the minimum viable, that's a huge thing. Maybe to wrap this up, I want to leave some closing thoughts here. We talked about building this into products and services. We talked a little bit about making security part of the culture, the brand, internal processes. We talked about all the positive fear mongering to enable entrepreneurs. We want to maybe talk about this is a cybersecurity conversation where we're not really addressing what happens after you've been attacked. Can we maybe what are some of the resources that we can maybe shout out and share, specific URLs or places that people can Google search to find that, and maybe have it now before they are desperately, frantically typing into their phone because something has happened? I'm assuming Mastercard has like some resources available for.
We definitely have a whole series of resources available at mastercard.ca. I mentioned that we have a partnership with Digital Main Street. We'll be, launching a whole series of learning. CFIB also has a whole series of, learning modules. There are a lot of information. There's a lot of information out there, municipal, provincial, federal governments. I mean, the whole ecosystem really understands how important preparation is. I will say that it's nothing to be ashamed of. You do need to, if you're in a situation where you have been hacked, I think transparency is key. And, talking to customers, talking to employees, letting them know what has happened, what you're doing about it. That's really important. Yeah. And, not to hide behind it. There are, call the police, call the Center for, Anti-Fraud in Ottawa. I mean, there are places that you can call and report this type of activity. I think it's important to shine a light on it.
Yeah, I think that's, again, we're talking about like best practice, deliverables, and then emotional burden of being like, everyone is a target. Don't be ashamed. Being silent about this stuff just makes you more vulnerable, which I think really resonates with me. Darryl, I guess we've now teased this twice. Obviously, Digital Main Street is a place to go for people who are looking, like you're implementing part of the digital adoption program. There's a place to go for digital transformation. We have identified that there's another component of that should be included as early as possible and not be tacked on after the fact. Do you want to anchor the tease? Can we, is there where would be the best URL people might go to and like just keep hitting refresh sometime in the future if they were interested in more information?
Can definitely add to everything Aviva said. By the end of October, because this is not only Cybersecurity Month, but it's also Small Business Month, we will be launching a new on-demand video course at digitalmainstreet.ca in partnership with the lovely folks at Mastercard. You may or may not see Aviva's face in one of the videos. I would just echo everything Aviva said. And I think too, just from, the being open and communicative part, I think it's, we've all gotten those emails. I got one from my car insurance company that said, your data may have been breached.
Oh man.
And I think it's
when the people that you pay for insurance are letting you know that they have been compromised, I think it underscores the extent to which this stuff is really, really serious.
No, the irony is not lost. I agree. But I think it's one of those things where we as consumers would rather know so that we can at least take a stab at being proactive ourselves. Whereas if it was after the fact and I didn't have a chance to change my password or something like that, and it's just kind of like, okay, well, you didn't even give me a chance, right? Yeah. So I think a lot of it just comes down to, being open and transparent. At the end of the day, like it happened. Whether you say something or not, it happened. But by being open and communicative, you're giving that person a chance to be proactive, change their password, check their bank accounts, make sure their credit wasn't compromised, whatever it might be.
You control the narrative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I love the fact that you're indexing on an educational component because I really want to get that percentage up of cyber training amongst SMBs in Canada to a much higher percentage, particularly since like if this is just going to be, if it's just freely available, there's just no reason not to be doing. Okay. Charlotte, I'm going to give you like open end here because you kind of came into this, and this is a little bit of opening, revealing the curtain a little bit. You're like, I have never been in a studio like this. There are way too many cameras was like one of the first things you said. And then you were like, I'm so excited to be here. This is a very important conversation. Acknowledging that you deal with a lot beyond the scope of this conversation. What do you want to maybe not tease or add to for maybe once people have gone through the educational series and they're ready to expand? What would you want to send people to?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of the critical points. We've acknowledged the fundamental importance of this issue for small and medium-sized businesses. We've talked about the fact that it's not as complex as people think. And we've pointed the way to important resources. I mentioned another, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity has important resources that I would point people to. And the points that Darryl and Aviva had made about, speaking up if you've been attacked is important. One of the critical problems here is that law enforcement doesn't have enough data because it's such an underreported.
Because nobody
talks about it because of the reputational risk that Aviva was talking about earlier. So that's a real challenge for governments and law enforcement. I would say that, have a plan in advance. Right, have the phone numbers that you're going to call before you get breached, which means every small business can do that now. Right, they can do an assessment of what their risk is. They can make a decision about how they want to invest to protect themselves, and they can make a list of phone numbers about folks they're going to call when it happens. And the point that you made right off the top, Douglas, it is going to happen. Do not think it is not going to happen. One of the problems, one of the major challenges of cybersecurity right now is that the problem is getting significantly worse, right? Attacks are becoming more sophisticated and more commonplace. We see no reason why that's not going to continue to happen with, AI folding out the way it is and everything else. So I hate to fearmonger in another way, but there are clear, concrete steps that small businesses can take, not just to protect themselves, but to help themselves succeed.
Okay, there are definitely more fears beyond this, but I love closing on the clear and concrete steps. So, right, this can and will happen to pretty much everyone. You are not alone. Do not remain silent. And hey, there are a bunch of resources. Get yourself prepared, even if it's just the online document shared with your team in a drive folder somewhere, so that you can, break that glass in case of the emergency that's going to come, is a great place to leave it. I'm going to give you a couple teases just for future stuff on BetaKit, because if you were watching this to the end, we might have had some streaming issues, so you're probably just seeing this on VOD. It's okay. Things happen. We're iterating, we're acknowledging, and we're moving on. So if that means that any questions that would have been submitted through the live stream, we did not get, but you can still give them to us, post in the comments, email us at BetaKit. We will get them answered for when we put this VOD live in the wrap up on BetaKit, and maybe also teasing an additional article with Aviva where we dig deeper into the report and the numbers, stuff that we didn't even talk about here, all the other components, how this impacts underrepresented small business owners across this country. There's more to this conversation. We look forward to maybe doing more, not just next October. This is always on. Cybersecurity Awareness Month, all year round. Until the next one, I am Douglas Soltys, Editor-in-Chief of BetaKit. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to the panelists for a really fun conversation about fear-mongering and scary things.
Thank you, Douglas.
Thank you.
Thank you.